All right, so today's lesson, we are going to talk about Pinterest SEO tips. We have a lot of Pinterest lessons in the course, but one thing we have not covered is basically how Pinterest defines SEO to us as the user. So I've spent a lot of time over the past several weeks reading the Pinterest engineering blog and researching other sites like Tailwind to try to get you information on how Pinterest SEO works. It's definitely more mysterious than basically Google SEO, which we're all pretty familiar with, but there are definitely things that you can do to help improve your SEO on Pinterest. So the first thing I want you guys to remember, and we talk about this in a lot of lessons, is that Pinterest is a search engine. It is not a social network. Even though people will talk about Pinterest being a social network, it truly is a search and discovery tool. And as long as you keep that in your mind when you are creating pins and writing those titles and descriptions, I think that will help you be more successful in Pinterest. So what Pinterest has told us is they use something called annotations as one of the main signals for understanding text. And that's text everywhere, on your pin, on your title, on your descriptions. And that is their primary, thing that they use for SEO is annotations. And annotations are assigned to the pins by Pinterest. So every pin that is created, Pinterest assigns maybe 5 or 6 annotations to the pin to help them then when someone searches, figure out what to show the user in the feed. And this is why, I just said this. So the annotations are used to retrieve the pins to match what someone is searching for. And I'm going to show you how this works. This is from the Pinterest engineering blog. So this is an example of a pin. It's a sloth sanctuary. And this is Pinterest showing us how they annotate this pin. So this is directly from Pinterest. And there are 3 parts of the annotation. The first is those 1 to 6 words or the phrase. The other one is the language. They do 28 languages on Pinterest. So EN would be English. And then that number that you see is actually the confidence score. And that is the number that Pinterest engineering assigns that term to say basically how confident they are in how accurate that term is. So this is they use this example because it's such a good one. But obviously when you look at this, Sloth Sanctuary has the highest confidence score. And that's because if you look at it, there are pictures of sloths on the pin. They use the word sloth sanctuary. So they're using that in the image on the text on the image. They use it in the title. And then they also use it in the description. So as you can see, Pinterest has a really high confidence that this pin is about a sloth sanctuary. They also believe that this pin is about sloths, Costa Rica, the Caribbean, animals, and travel. And as you can see, the confidence score goes down based on the term. So travel is only 0.8, and the highest you can get is 1. I think 0.99. I don't even know if they go to 1. But travel, they feel like this pin is about travel, but they're not nearly as confident that travel is one of the keywords as sloth sanctuary or sloth. So that's something to be thinking about when you create your pin, is that Pinterest is looking at the entire title, description, image, everything, and then coming up with these annotations. And this is exactly what Pinterest has said they compute the annotations from. Your pin title, your description, the URL of your post, the board name that it's on, the board description, the title of the page that you send people to. So that's basically your piece of content, the description of the link, and then they look at the image. So they, as that sloth one, you saw that they were looking at the images of the sloth. The text on your pin is important, and then search queries that frequently lead to clicks on the pin. And I'm not going to talk specifically about the search queries, except for to tell you that sometimes you could put a pin up, and let's just go back to that sloth pin. Maybe that pin comes up, and I'm trying to think of something that's not in the, maybe jungle tours, right? Is something that people are searching for, jungle tours or rainforest tours, and they're clicking on this pin. Even though rainforest tours is nowhere mentioned on the pin or in the description or maybe even in the post, that's telling Pinterest that if people search for something and then click on it, that could be another annotation. So then they will add that to it. So that's probably how travel got on there, right? Maybe people are searching for travel. They're seeing this sloth sanctuary pin and they're really interested in going to visit. So travel is leading people to click on that pin, even though it's not really mentioned in the text, in the images, or in the description. So we don't really cover that in the rest of this lesson, but I wanted to make sure you guys knew what it meant. So this is just a gluten-free pumpkin spice mug cake, and these are all the places that Pinterest is looking when they're creating those annotations for your pin. They're looking at the picture. Does it look like a cake, a cupcake? What is Pinterest thinking? They say, you know, there's the word pumpkin in there. You can see there's the title where it says gluten-free pumpkin spice mug cake. There's also the description right below that, and then there's also the board that it's pinned to. So when Pinterest has a pin, it's going to look at all of those things when they're determining what the annotation should be for that pin. So the first tip I have for you is make sure your pin has a great title. And the steps that you can take to make sure your title is amazing are make sure that your title matches that image and your description and the text. Sometimes we talk about having the title be a little bit different from the text on your pin, and that's okay, but it can't be so completely different that they don't match up. It should be something where you can understand that you might say travel and you might say tourism, right? So those would be very similar, but you want to make sure that the title of that pin is going to match everything else that you're putting out there. I highly recommend using a keyword research tool just like you would when you're doing SEO research for your blog posts. You can use Ubersuggest, which gives you, I think, 5 free searches a day. Ahrefs is the paid tool that Steve and I use, and you can also use Pinterest Trends, which I will cover later. And you want to use those long tail keywords. It's easier to rank for the long tail than the short term and the short words. So versus cheap shipping versus the cheapest way to ship packages from home. You want to go with the cheapest way to ship packages from home because you're going to have a little less competition. It's going to be easier for you to rank on Pinterest. And then the final thing you can do is use that Pinterest guided search, which we talked about in a couple other videos, but basically it's when you type a search term in Pinterest and it brings up all those little bubbles right underneath it that give you more like the long tail keywords. When you're giving your pin a good title, it's very easy. If people are pinning directly from your website, it will automatically populate with your blog post title. However, if you're uploading a pin directly to Pinterest, I just put an image in here so you can see where you add the title. And basically, the gluten-free pumpkin spice mug cake is a really good example because she basically wrote the exact same thing in her title. So it's very clear to Pinterest that she wants to either rank for something with pumpkin spice, which is probably what it is, or the mug cake. So this is an example of how this actually works. I typed in the search fall gardening tips, and this is the exact screenshot of what I got. This is a desktop screenshot, so just so you know what we're working with. And as you can see, the number one pin, so that one that's on the top left, is what to plant in your fall garden. So that was my top search result, and that's the one that people are going to be most likely to click on. And let's just examine what this pin does correctly. So we have the search term is fall gardening tips. In their image, they have vegetables or garden items. I don't know what they are. It looks like vegetables. So that's the first thing. The image is giving a signal of garden. The text on the image is fall garden, so exactly what I typed in. They used it in their title, what to plant in your fall garden. And as you notice, they have a very similar title to the pin title, but the pin image itself has given more description. So you can do that, or you can switch it around and put your extra words in your title on the where you fill it in on the Pinterest. So you can do either way, but they're giving you more information. If you can read that description, they use the word fall garden there, and then they pinned it to a board called Mr. McGregor's Garden or something McGregor's Garden. So they're using the words fall and garden a lot of times, which is basically sending all these signals to Pinterest to say, hey, this is a pin about fall gardening. The next thing you want to do is give your pin a great description. You have 500 characters to write as much of a description as you can. This is where you want to use your keywords. You want to show the user how you're going to solve their problem, and you want to continue talking about that same topic when you are writing your description. Now, it's important to note that when people are searching on Pinterest and your Pinterest pin comes up in the feed, they're only going to see like the first 30 to 60 characters. You want to make sure that those first 30 to 60 characters are something that's going to catch the user's eye. So you want to put something really compelling in those first maybe 2 sentences, but for SEO, Pinterest is actually going to read that entire description. So if you can get it to 500 characters, I actually struggle with this a little bit because it's hard to write 500 characters about like a recipe, but if you can get those long tail keywords in your description, that's going to be really helpful for you because Pinterest is searching the entire description, not just what appears to people who are using Pinterest. The next thing that I think is really important, and this is tough if you started on Pinterest years ago, because typically you would create a board that was called Yummy Recipes or My Favorite DIY Hacks or something like that. And what your board should be titled, if it's Yummy Recipes, is maybe desserts with 5 ingredients or less, dinners that you can make in 30 minutes, e-commerce tricks to help grow your email list. So you want a really specific board title. And then underneath your board title, you have the opportunity to write a description. I actually use this one because this is not a great description. It's the backyard homestead and gardening board, but she wrote, my passion, gardening and backyard homesteading. Now, she did use her keywords again, but she could write a lot more in that board description. You get 500 characters like you do in the pin description. And so you want to make the most of that because Pinterest is using that to help identify what pins are about, because if you pin that fall garden to this board, Pinterest is going to look at what that board description is about for SEO purposes. You put your relevant keywords towards the beginning. Pinterest has said that's important. And then what I like to do, and what a couple, I think Tailwind and Pinterest has recommended, is that you want to talk about like what pain point your board is going to solve. So if this is a backyard homesteading and gardening board, you might want to say something like, this will help you get started creating your own backyard garden, learn how to raise chickens and goats and eat from your backyard for the next 6 months or something like that. So you talk more specifically about what that topic is. If you have an old Pinterest account like I do, I'm still in the process of updating my board titles and my board descriptions because I do have boards called, awesome kid food, which is not great, but you want to go through and fix that. If you're just starting out, you're at an advantage because you can do great board titles and descriptions from the very beginning. The next thing that Pinterest has come out, which I actually didn't know until I started researching this, is that make sure your post and your URL match. So Pinterest will actually ding you if your title and your image and description are different from the actual post. So if I were to post a pin of a Christmas tree, and maybe the title was like Christmas crafts, but then I actually in the post was maybe like how to make your own candle. It's kind of different. Pinterest is viewing that as different. Now, if I wrote Christmas candle craft in my title, then that would make more sense. But make sure that when you do your post URL and your Pinterest content, that those are very similar, because Pinterest is actually looking at your blog content when they're making these annotations and decisions for what's going to show up in the SEO search results. So that's actually really important to make sure that there's coordination between your pin title, your pin description, and the URL and post information on your actual website. This is an example from that top ranking fall garden. When I clicked over and went to the website, it's perfect, right? The URL is why and when you should plant a fall garden, and her title is exactly the same. And her very first paragraph is, if you are new to gardening, you may not realize that you can plant a fall garden. So she is hitting everything, every signal she is sending to Pinterest says this is a fall gardening piece of content. And that's really important. That's what you want to do. And that's probably why she's showing up number one. The next thing you want to do is to make sure your image makes sense. This is harder if you run a site like Steve's with My Wife Quit Her Job, because it's hard to find an image that talks about email marketing or SEO. But if you're writing any kind of a content site where you're talking about DIY, gardening, food, how-tos, you can usually find images that match what you're talking about, but you want to make sure that all of that is working together to send Pinterest the same message. So if you're writing a post on email marketing, have the email little mail sign or use some email marketing logos, right? And that way you're sending signals to Pinterest that this is what that's about. I just used these two examples. The sloth sanctuary that we talked about initially, that's clearly something about sloths. The other one I found was the Halloween bundt cake. I thought this was a really great image because that's clearly a bundt cake. And so that's sending that information to Pinterest. That I like actually how they use the Halloween colors and the bundt cake, because clearly that's like a fall color scheme, and it's also clearly a bundt cake. So that's a really good example of a food pin where exactly what that is when you look at it. You wouldn't even need to know the title. You might not think it's Halloween, but it's clearly fall. Another thing that I found out recently is that Pinterest reads the text on pins, which we've always known, But this is an image from the Pinterest engineering blog, and they show you how they read the text on pins. So I just assumed that they read the text that we added to the pins. But you can see in this image, if you look at the top towards the back, there's the word books, which is actually in the picture. It's not like text that someone added. And Pinterest is actually reading that as well. So make sure when you're using images, especially if you have things in the background, Pinterest will actually read that text too. The other thing I think it's important to note is we talk a lot about like the scripty fonts. Pinterest is actually reading this as ook shops, not book shops, because it's not connecting the B to the rest of the word. So be careful when you use those scripty fonts, because like here, I think because the B is not actually connected in the font, that's probably why Pinterest is pulling it that way. But that tells you that Pinterest is reading those scripty fonts, and you want to make sure that it's really readable and that they're going to get the whole word, because certain words that's going to change significantly the meaning. This is clearly like there's a lot of books in here, and they actually have the word books in the back, but it could be something much different if the word is not such a simple word as bookshops. Another really interesting fact is that Pinterest uses variations so that you don't have to. So when you do a search for, we'll go back to our fall gardening, they'll actually, if you did a search for autumn gardening, they would understand that autumn and fall are interchangeable, and so they're going to include those in the search results. Same things with like different forms of the word, like cold versus chilly, or hacks also means tips. Words like kids, children, those are all interchangeable to Pinterest, so you don't really have to worry about, because what I used to think I had to do was I'd use one tense of the word in the title, but then I'd use a different one in the description, thinking I had to hit all those, and you actually don't. Pinterest uses those variations in their algorithm, so you don't have to worry about making them yourself and using multiple forms of the same word to make sure Pinterest understands. They're already doing that for you. Step 8. Use Pinterest trends. You find this at trends.pinterest.com. They released this, I think almost 2 years ago in beta, but it's been available to everybody for over a year. And basically what you want to do is you can use it a little bit like you would use Uber Suggests or Ahrefs. It's not nearly as powerful as either of those, but it's a similar concept. You basically go there and you type in a search term that you're thinking about maybe using, and then it gives you you can see here it's a graph of when that term becomes popular. So I did Christmas because Christmas is coming up, but as you can see, it's giving me the last 12 months, and it was clearly spiking in November, and then as you can see, it's a drastic drop off coming to January. And then as you can see, and when you move over to like September of this year, it's starting to pick up basically at the beginning of October. So what does that tell me? It tells me that if I have Christmas content that I want on Pinterest, I need to start pinning that like 2 months before it starts to trend up. So if I want to start pinning Christmas content, I want to pin that probably in, August, early September, so that it has time to gain traction on Pinterest. The other thing that you can do with Pinterest trends is you can put in up to 4 different search terms to compare. So I can't read this from here. It's Christmas decorations and holiday decor. So as you can see, like Christmas decorations is significantly more popular than holiday decor, but it's just another term that I could go for. And then I actually put a third term in here that was like DIY Christmas decorations. And so you can compare these with each other, and you can use these related terms down here. As soon as you click on this term, like I clicked on the DIY term, and then it immediately populates in that graph. So it's a good way to get ideas about how you should title the content. So when you're looking for those long tail search terms, you can use Pinterest trends to help you find it, as well as help you understand when you really should be starting to put that content out. And I thought this was kind of interesting with the DIY decor. So if you look here, that one actually is trending up quicker than the other two. And I think it's because if you're DIYing things, you want a little more time. So it's a really good way to understand when people are going to be searching for the content that you're putting out. And this is a free tool on Pinterest. You can use it. The other thing that it has at the very bottom is popular pins that are being that are populating the search result for those terms. So Pinterest is telling you these are the pins that we think are representative of those search terms. And when you click on this, I think I have an image of this. Yeah. When you click on that for Christmas, I think that was Christmas decor. Pinterest is telling me like this is what we think is relevant for Pinterest decor. So you can, or Christmas decor. So you can use that tool to basically figure out what type of pins you should design, what sort of style. You can use it to figure out, like, one thing I noticed here is a lot of the pins don't have any text on them. So for me, I would say, you know what, I might do a pin with text so it stands out a little bit more from all these other images. I also noticed that the color trend this year is clearly like the red and green. So maybe I try like something blue, or maybe I stick with that red and green color scheme because I know it's really popular. And finally, the last thing is, so let's say you've done all these things, right? You have a great image that makes sense. You have a good title. You have good text on your image. You've pinned it to a good board. You can actually check your pins to see how effective you've been in creating an SEO friendly pin. And all you need to do is go to the pin URL that you've created, and underneath that, Pinterest automatically populates something called More Like This, and basically it's pins that Pinterest thinks is related to the content you've put out. And this is a great way to see, this is especially good to see if Pinterest is checking your images correctly. So I had a spelling word game pin, and when I look at all the pins that are related, I can see that, okay, you know, it's pretty good. There's some homeschool worksheets. There's a lot of like activities, manipulatives. So for me, I feel like Pinterest, what I've done is good. It's good enough to continue, and, you know, I'm not going to want to redo that pin because Pinterest is showing me a lot of things that are very similar. So Pinterest is reading that pin correctly. I have one more example of that. This is another pin I made a couple years ago, and it's actually pretty, I think it's not a great pin at all. It's pretty, but it doesn't really convey a lot because you can't actually tell that that's a cupcake in the pin, which I realized once I started checking these. And so when I clicked on the more pins, I can see that what Pinterest has keyed in on is the fall, but it's also keyed in on the pumpkins. So if I don't want the pumpkin to be the primary in that pin, then I'm going to want to redo those or get a different image. I have other images for that. Redo that image so that pumpkin is seen more cupcake than pumpkin. If the pins that you've already created are relevant to what you want to be found for versus maybe Pinterest is, like with this one, I was actually kind of surprised when I saw those pumpkins because I thought, well, that's definitely not what I want to be found for that pin. So make sure you do that once you create your pin to make sure that you're on the right track.